As he said, my name is Nicole Weiss. I'm a clinical therapist with the newly established National Institute for Human Resilience. We created the GRIT Resilience Coach program in March of this year when COVID really started sweeping the nation and really making an impact on our community. GRIT was established to train just volunteers in the community so that we can promote wellness, promote resilience to really just our fellow community members, our friends, our families, our neighbors, our acquaintances, and to really be able to have some skills in knowing how to reach out and make some of these connections, and then what kind of helpful resources you can provide or what kind of strengths you can help promote in each other. As our world, as we learned in the last couple of months, it is impacting everybody on some level. And so this program is created to make connections in the event of a disaster. COVID's unique, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but when we go through a disaster, making those human connections is really important. We can strengthen coping, we can spread support, and we can provide really helpful resources, and that gives a really positive impact on healing and creates and promotes resilience for everybody. I firmly believe that everybody has some level of resilience. We wouldn't be standing here today if we didn't, but getting some more skills and strengthening certain areas in our life can improve that resilience. And I think we're in a unique opportunity to really build resilience as an entire community. So kind of capitalizing on that opportunity and wanting to make sure that we reach connections. When you go through this GRIT program, you can then kind of call yourself a GRIT coach leader or GRIT coach. And when we do that, it just helps strengthen the resilience, spread the support within your organization and within your community. So we've created several different versions of GRIT. And as we go through it, you'll see GRIT will provide some basic education on stress, resilience, coping skills, whatnot. And it'll also give you some very concrete, these are 5 steps you can do in making some of those connections. We started the GRIT program as just a community level. We expanded that a little bit to the education area, and now we've spread that to leadership. And so the training that you're gonna go through right now is gonna give you some specific skills and information specific to leaders and small business owners. And in doing that, we hope to provide some education, training, and support you in having to adapt quickly to maybe a virtual workforce. Maybe you've had to work within the essential business world as well, and what kind of tips can you use for that? Or maybe you've been virtual and now you're kind of adapting to this back at home, back to work back to work transition. And what does that look like? We're entering into just a really unique and complex world. And so hopefully getting some skills and knowing how to make that as smooth or as helpful as possible. And again, this is where that interaction with each other and building up that community can be really helpful. So what is a GRIT coach leader? Keep saying that. A GRIT coach leader's role is to support and motivate employees, or again, your organization or your community, who might be especially struggling with COVID-19 or any other disaster. So knowing that you're going to gain some education and some skills, and we adapt the language a little bit around COVID-19 right now, but you can really use these skills and resources for any disaster that happens, any significant stress or trauma your organization might experience, any natural disaster that might be yet to come. So these are really adaptable skills. And then we also want to support and manage an organization or a community within the challenges placed by COVID-19. So within this mindset, GRIT coach leaders, then you yourself can then provide education and support at an individual level, at a group level, or at a community level without being a medical or mental health professional. So there is that line. We don't expect anybody to really act in the role of a mental health professional unless that's what you've been formally trained in. But you can still support and give really helpful resources without crossing that kind of line. So GRIT coach leaders provide short-term resilience support through effective listening, education on stress and disaster response and recovery, and referrals. And ultimately what we're aiming for is to provide hope during a challenging time. Time and time again, hope is one of the most powerful factors in promoting resilience throughout yourself and your community. And so that's the big premise of our program, is how do we just make some of these very human connections and provide some hope? Knowing that, again, this never replaces professional help. So who would we be helping as a GRIT coach leader? This would be focusing on helping employees within your organization or community, particularly those who might be struggling with specific challenges of COVID-19. And while there's no clear list of individuals who might be in need, someone who could use some extra support or use some resources in this time might be someone who's being especially withdrawn from others, or they seem to be isolating from the organization, isolating from their community. Maybe they're showing signs of stress, such as not sleeping, seeming really exhausted. Maybe they are sleeping, but they still wake up feeling exhausted. Maybe when they're sleeping, they're waking up pretty often. They're very restless sleeping. Or maybe, again, their sleep pattern has just changed completely. That's something that we've seen both with essential workers and with individuals who've had to work from home, this kind of change in your entire day structure. Someone who is working a high stress or impact job could also have some help right now. Someone who's already coping with another existing mental health problem. What we're seeing right now is in the mental health field is that people who already had an underlying problem of depression or anxiety are now that's being amplified, that's being exemplified by COVID-19. Even if you're not being impacted on like the severe levels, you're still feeling the stress of what's going on. When you add in the protests and the riots on top of that, that stress level has really increased for a wide variety of people. So it's just something to kind of recognize. If you know somebody who already has some anxiety or depression throughout their life, this current time could be adding to that or worsening those conditions. Again, someone who can help is someone who's might be under significant stress or going through a difficult life transition. We're seeing this a lot in our college kids, for example, or even just any student right now who hasn't been able to get the normal education life. We're seeing this in people who have had to transition jobs or lose jobs, and there's complicated factors behind that. People who are going through a divorce right now, having to move across country, all of these kind of life transitions just add to the stress that COVID has already placed on someone. And then someone who maybe is a single parent, or they're trying to manage children at home and figure out their financial situation with staying at home requirement and, you know, educating their kids and balancing all of that. And I know our teachers are especially stressed out right now. So it might not be people within your own organization per se, but recognizing that these are the types of individuals who could use some extra support, and thinking both within and outside your community, who might that be? So within our Grit Lead course, over the next 5 modules that we're going to cover starting today, and then as he said, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to hopefully give you some information on some leadership challenges amidst COVID-19 and talk about ways you can combat some of those challenges. And then again, kind of that interaction piece, interacting as a group here and sharing ideas, sharing struggles you might be having, kind of talking through some of those situations. I'm going to give you some information on general stress, disaster, and trauma-related stress, because those look a little bit differently, as well as how COVID-19 stress is a little bit different. We're going to then give you information on resilience, disaster recovery, coping skills, and support, and then how to support employees who, again, are working from home or transitioning back to the workplace. So we're going to give you a lot of education, and then we're going to give you these 5 concrete skills or steps you can take in making some of those connections. So this is our first kind of pause for reflection. So hop into that chat function, answer this question: who in your organization or your community could really benefit from a conversation with a Grit coach leader? And again, knowing that these conversations are really just checking in on each other. And we're going to talk about how to ask about strengths and how to promote some of that. But who in your organization or community could you see as maybe struggling a little bit extra right now, or could use a little bit extra support? So I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to hopefully put in for the chat there, trying to address it to everyone or to all panelists and attendees. And as people are kind of going into that chat box, I can kind of share on my end. So I work at a clinical mental health facility, or a group practice for mental health. And some of the people who have especially struggled were some of our clinicians who weren't as used to virtual skills, and they had to transition within a day or two to going to virtual therapy appointments, which is not easy. And so our expectation, coming from a university and coming from the kind of government funding that we had to transition very quickly, and we have to follow very strict licensure guidelines on how we perform therapy, make some of those connections on a therapeutic basis. And so within a few days, everybody had to figure out how to provide mental health services through Microsoft Teams or Zoom. And so people were really struggling and figuring out how that goes. And then we had some therapists who were also in the middle of a transition. So I talked about that moving can be a pretty significant stressor. So not only moving, but moving in a virtual world of having to continue to provide services was really difficult for some. Okay, so some of the responses coming in. I think anyone can benefit from a grit coach leader on some level. Completely agree. That's kind of why we launched this. And then this one says, agreed, everyone can provide a peace of mind, or grit coach can provide peace of mind and reflection for us all. Anyone in the service industry. So that's been a huge one right now. And as as Betsy said, so there's so many unknowns. The service industry has been hit so hard by COVID-19, not only in the having to close doors within hours notice for some, but then also having the pressure to open up again, having employees having to go in and sometimes risk safety in order to have a job. And that's such a difficult decision to make. As the owners of those, it's a difficult decision to know when to bring your employees back in. What kind of safety precautions do you need to put in place at a minimum? And then what do you want to put in place for even more protection? And then you get this horrible kind of feedback lately of people getting really upset over those safety precautions. And so there's so much stress going on within that service industry that could use a lot of support in working through some of those challenges. Frontline employees who are working closely with your customers and set the tone for your brand, absolutely. Juggling work commitments and homeschooling, colleagues, and then teachers and those who work in the education department. Absolutely, those are some pretty heavy hitters right now. I think hopefully we have immense respect for our teachers right now as we're learning what they really do have to juggle and manage on a day-to-day basis. And then, for people who are at home trying to juggle that's an extra challenge for them in addition to having to work and do some of those extra things as well. So really good examples there. What the big takeaway I think is as one of those first comments said, anybody can benefit from these. And so you can really use grit coach skills at any time. You can really support anybody at an individual, group, or community level. And that's just what we're hoping to provide here for you. Okay, so if you want to kind of join in the whole coaching program, you're going to get all the skills and training here. But if you want to continue to get information on different grit programs that we offer, if you want to participate in any of the survey or data collection that we gather, that's important for us to continue to do some of this work. And again, just want access to more resources, you can sign up to be a grit coach. And that email or that website is up at the top, but it's grit.uccs.edu. And you can sign up. I'll send you the recordings of all of this if needed. You'll also get things like a workbook and some of these other extra pieces. But anybody can sign up for it. It's completely free. So you yourself can sign up for it. Anybody in your organization can, anybody in your family, whoever. Again, the whole premise is just to support each other. But if you go through the full training, these are some of the extra pieces you get. Okay, so our goals over the next 5 modules will be to gain a basic understanding of resilience, common stress reactions and disasters, stress-related problems, learn how to support and listen to someone who might be struggling, understand how to build upon strengths and resilience, learn to promote effective coping skills, a sense of self-efficacy. That's your confidence in your ability to cope with stress and trauma, and resilience. And again, how to learn how to support employees working from home or transitioning back to the workplace. And then we're going to throw a ton of resources for you to use. A bunch of them are free, a bunch of them are virtual that you can use yourself or share with your organization. Kind of keep hitting this one, but really our point here is just to make some human connections and share some helpful resources and active coping. So here's our 5 steps to grit, and this is what we'll go into in the next couple of modules. Your first step is just how do you make connection with somebody? What does that look like? How do you get permission to talk about some of the heavier stuff? And how do you handle people who don't want to talk? How to ask questions. So there's questions and there's good questions to ask. How to identify coping strengths and resilience in each other. How to add to those strengths. We'll give you some 6 key areas to look for. And then how to kind of review that conversation, summarize, give some action steps, and provide some resources for each other. As a grit coach leader, kind of the expectations that you would take on is to obviously take this initial training. So there's 5 modules, we'll do 5 webinars. If you miss any of them, you can just let us know and we'll send you a recording of one. But we ask that you finish all 5 just so you get all of those skills. To maintain ethical behavior, keep confidence and privacy. When we're making some of these connections, sometimes people share very vulnerable information. So we just want to have that understanding that you'll keep that in confidence as much as you can, and doing things like not recording names, things like that. Be knowledgeable about the resources within your community. And this is why these kinds of trainings are also really helpful, because we can share those resources with one another. Actively encourage others to participate in education and awareness programs, and then just kind of abide by the spirit of we're promoting resiliency and we're supporting our community and organization. So going back to that confidentiality, in order to make effective connection and support, that really relies heavily on a sense of trust between individuals within that conversation. So as you're making some conversations, just don't share any of the personal information that was shared from Grit Coach conversations with others. If you're taking notes because that helps your memory, or you want to kind of record or think about certain conversations, you absolutely can. Just try not to use things like real names or anything that could be easily referenced back to whoever that is. Try really hard to have conversations in private locations when possible. If you're seeing people in person or even virtual, just making sure that nobody can necessarily overhear your conversation. Neither of you are recording without permission, things like that. Just trying to avoid being overheard when possible. There's no kind of legal protection on confidentiality in these kinds of relationships, because you're not operating in a professional world. So having that kind of basic understanding too is you kind of have to have that agreement of confidentiality on both ends and abide by that spirit. So again, you're not going to be providing any kind of mental health or medical professional advice or suggestions. You will be providing support in general, promoting some strengths, validating experiences, which is incredibly helpful and important, discussing coping skills, educating about stress and trauma, and then sharing resources, but you won't be giving any advice. And then we'll also send you a lot of different resources, and we'll talk about them in the webinars that you can access and share at any time as well. If you have any questions so far, feel free to throw them into the chat. Like I said, I will address them whenever I have a moment. Practicing skills. So we're going to talk about these 5 concrete skills, and I really encourage you to take time to practice the skills that you learn, whether that's out loud to yourself, just do you hear what it sounds like to ask some of these questions, whether that's having somebody within your business kind of bouncing off and practicing these skills with. You just maybe call up a friend or call somebody and just say, hey, I'm practicing. I just want to see what this sounds like. It's really helpful because it makes that conversation feel more natural, get out a little bit easier. And then practice the coping skills we're going to talk about and some of the resources we'll share for yourself as well, because not only will it make you more knowledgeable about what that resource or coping skill is, but it's going to boost and help your own resilience as well. So check it out. Like I said, just about everything we'll show you is completely free. Certain apps and stuff have paid subscription versions, but other than that, these are free resources you can try out. All right, so this part you don't have to worry about quite as much unless you want to be part of like kind of the full Grit program, but we do check in every week just to see how things are going, because we want to see what are your successes, what are your main concerns, how can we support you in doing that. Coming from a small business, if there's something that you're particularly struggling with, we want to be able to support and figure out how do we help you with that. And I know that's one of the reasons why Survive and Thrive set up this mentor-mentee relationship, so that you guys can get assistance in going through some of these areas. We also want to check in, was it stressful to be a coach? Did you use any skills, or, what questions do you have in going through some of this? So heading first into some of the leadership challenges that we've seen amidst COVID-19. First, there is that challenge of allowing employees to work from home, and what the decision of, are we a company that has to have employees work from home right now, or are we one of those exempt companies that can kind of work within the environment but very safely? And then what kind of challenges were associated with that? For instance, did everybody have a computer they could use virtually? Did everybody have the resources they needed to be able to operate from home, right? There are certain challenges that are attached to that. And if you weren't a company that could work from home, what ways could you support essential staff who needed to work at the workplace? So there were things like, again, what safety measures needed to be taken inside the workplace? Were you able to obtain PPE? And are you able to maintain that quantity of PPE? What kind of safety and cleanliness guidelines can you follow? And then again, this recent trend of how do we deal with people who are upset with essential workers or upset with the safety precautions that are being put in place by businesses. How to navigate leadership techniques within a virtual setting is a big challenge too, because you're not seeing people day to day. So communication kind of gets a little lost or gets a little stiff. There might be things that you need to share, but technology gets in the way. I know with my role, because I do a lot of different trainings, I've used all four major video connections: Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, and Google Hangouts. And every single day, at least one of them is presenting a challenge. And so that's a huge barrier in times as well. And then again, do your employees have things like, stable internet connection, a computer that has a webcam, some of those other things. How to support employees who might be facing economic struggles, such as a loss of finances. So that's a huge piece as well. It could be that you've had to lay off employees. It could be that you just had to drastically reduce hours to make that fit better into your budget. It could be not only your organization, but it might be their spouse's organization that had to lay people off. And so they're dealing with some loss of finances in those ways as well. So I'm going to give you some resources of where to guide people to get some of these, some of this help, some of these guidance in order to help with some of those economic struggles. And then how to encourage employees to maintain their own strength and wellness, and then how to promote that within yourself as well. So I think the very first thing that tends to go with leadership is your own self-care and your own mental wellness. So how do you take some time to kind of promote that within yourself as well? Have you guys noticed any of these leadership challenges amongst your own company? We'll kind of talk about this again in a little bit, but is there anything where you yourself had to kind of sit back and think, okay, how do I figure this out? Or how do I face this new challenge? Just briefly, I'm going to go over some organizational structures that we often see in businesses and leadership. So first of all, there's this vertical organization in which the owner, CEO, or owner, president, CEO, whoever that might be, is kind of this head person in charge. Underneath that person, you would have people like managers or directors. And then underneath that would be, people like supervisors, advertising, sales, kind of those kinds of occupations. And then below that even is extra staff who do kind of more of the day-to-day things. And so we have kind of this stepwise construct versus a horizontal one, where you might have a leader, a CEO, director, whoever, and then everybody kind of works on an even playing field. And this might look really different for your own organization. You might have a little bit of a mix. You might have, one predominant over the other. What's important to take away here is that you can use these grit skills and steps at any level and within any structure. So you can support your director just as much as you can support somebody who's, working underneath you or reporting back to you. So knowing that these skills are very transferable, you can really reach out and help anyone. And then you yourself can get some help as well, no matter where you fall in that structure. Talking about a little bit of the organizational constraints that we often see. What kind of equipment or supplies are available, whether that was poor or just inadequate supplies. Again, in the beginning, I think there was even more of a struggle on this. But some of the constraints we see is just not having enough or not having the right kinds, especially for PPE and cleanliness products. What kind of rigid organization rules or procedures might be in place? So this might be a little bit more flexible with small businesses, but there might be still, protocols or rules that you have to abide by. For instance, the governmental rules for what kind of establishments can be open right now falls under that kind of rigid rule as well. And you might have to decide, do I fall under this? Am I flexible? What do I need to do? Like I mentioned, I follow a licensure board, and they've been extremely strict about what we can and cannot do. And so, my own leaders have had to say, like, tough luck, this is what we have to do. Maybe you're dealing with some difficult supervisors, or you're kind of facing your own challenges really, really hard, and you don't know how to support your employees. You might have lack of necessary information about what to do or how to do it, and then conflicting job demands. So maybe, you're a leader here and within your own company, but you're also having to reach out to other organizations and make connections. You're also having to deal with stress and family situations. There's all of these demands on your time and your resources that might conflict with one another. So here's where I'm going to ask for a little bit more feedback coming back again. What's your own organizational structure? What kind of constraints constraints have you had to work through? How might you work within those constraints to support your employees? So giving some time again to answer this question, share with each other what you've been dealing with. Maybe, maybe it's situations or challenges that you've already overcome now that we're a few months into this, or maybe it's something that you're still trying to figure out, how do I get through this and what kind of support do you need? So go ahead and take a few minutes and type some of those into the chat box for everyone to see. And I kind of mentioned with my own organizational structure, we're a little bit of both. We've got a very vertical one working within a university, but then our own clinic is pretty horizontal. We're all in a fairly even playing field. And then some of the constraints we worked with is how to adapt very, very quickly to virtual, when to allow people to come back into our clinic and what that looks like. So right now it's very, very case by case. Everybody has to wear a mask. We've got, protection everywhere. We check temperatures. So there's a lot of constraints that have arisen in order for us to accommodate and help our own clients. But I think our leaders have really stepped up in figuring out how to support us in doing that. We've had a lot of kind of stepwise support going through some of these new challenges. So giving some time if you want to enter into the chat box. And even if you can't answer any of these kind of possible constraints ones, just what kind of challenges have you had, or what kind of challenges do you foresee yourself having in the last couple of months, in the next few months? What has it been like for you? I think it's really hard to decide when to be virtual versus in person. Absolutely, it's difficult. +1 agrees. Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult question because people sometimes function better being virtual. Some people really struggle with that loss of connection, loss of human connection. It's much harder to do like group projects virtually. It's much harder to connect on a general daily basis virtually. So there's just more challenges that come up with virtual. This one says, our organization became completely remote and allows for any employee to stay remote because safety is our priority. It's wonderful. In the office, there are free masks available for anyone entering the building. That's a great, great constraint that you guys overcame pretty quickly. And keeping that safety as a priority is really important. The free mask is wonderful if you have the means to be able to do that, especially when people are challenging you back on needing to wear a mask. You could just like say, hey, here's a free one. We're not even, pushing, you don't have to bring your own. Here's one you can just use. But that definitely can bring up a constraint as well. Paul says it's a horizontal structure, mostly challenged by being able to allow clients back to the office while following guidelines. Space in the office doesn't allow 6 feet spacing, so difficult to comply with that. That's a really, really great point too. I'm here at my clinic today, but I think we have 8 client rooms and only 5 of them can fit within the 6 feet structure. So 3 of our rooms are completely, useless more or less, unless you're just in there only by yourself. So that's a great example of something you can't necessarily change. Space is what it is. So you have to figure out how do you go around using that space, or how do you still allow that 6 feet rule? Maybe you have to start using conference rooms, other kind of spaces like that. This one's currently in a voluntary return to office phase. When we move to less voluntary, it will be potentially challenging as everyone's situation is quite different. That's another really great example. There's some people who want to stay at working from home because that's what works best for them. There's some people who are really eager to get back to that sense of normalcy and getting back to the office and having what an office provides for you. And so kind of approaching that when you can at an individual voluntary basis, but at some point, some organizations can't stay virtual forever. So what does it look like to come back into the office? Really, really great feedback, everyone. Thanks for sharing that. If you've had a constraint that you've overcome, such as the free mask situation, what are ways that you have overcome some of that? And we'll go ahead and continue, but feel free to keep sharing within that chat box. So one of the reasons why we created GRIT and why we're pushing so hard to make some of these human connections is because social support is one of the most powerful resources for protecting against the negative effects of stress. And it also offers protection against traumatic stress, secondary traumatic stress, and job burnout. Time and time and time again, when we look at what factors help someone, an individual or a community overcome challenges, it's social support every time. So just keeping that in mind, if you don't know what to say, and hopefully we're going to give you some skills to be able to know what to say, But if you don't know, I want to reach out to this person, but I'm afraid I would say something wrong, or I want to reach out, but I don't know how to even start that conversation. Just keep in mind that that simple connection is sometimes the most important thing, is somebody just recognizing my boss is thinking of me, my coworker is thinking of me, and I appreciate that, and I feel more validated in the challenges I'm going through. So in creating grit, we really worked through these next few principles that we're going to talk about. So these core principles of disaster support. When we experience a disaster, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next module, when we experience a disaster, we go through a pretty typical phase where the disaster, maybe we have a little bit of time to prep for the disaster. And we can use the example of a hurricane. We might have maybe a day's notice that the storm is coming. We'll have a few hours notice that, hey, it's hitting really hard. We should probably start to evacuate. And then the disaster hits, right? And then the community spends the next few weeks coming together, figuring out resources, recovering. Typically, that trajectory is pretty predictable of what kind of resources we need to get out there. And in doing that, these are the core principles of disaster support that providers look for and providers try to instill in the community. So first would be that personal sense of safety, which is obviously a huge thing amongst COVID-19. What ways can we physically and mentally calm ourselves and our community? Again, with that social support, how do we connect with other people? Building hope for the future, which is a huge premise of what grit hopes to instill, is just, again, hope. And then building sense of self and collective efficacy, which is that confidence in your ability to cope effectively with the disaster at hand. So starting first with that, promoting that sense of safety. So disasters tend to threaten the lives and the livelihood of individuals and communities. COVID-19 is no exception to this, right? We do know for a fact that it's contagious enough to be impacting a wide variety of our population. We do know that it's deadly enough to have a death rate attached to it. And so just that knowledge and that fear can really threaten the safety of individuals and communities as a whole. And we also know that it might be impacting communities, different communities more severely, less severely in some areas. So there's just this general constant threat that everybody has regarding their safety. As the numbers continue to rise in the world, so too is that sense of personal threat and vulnerability. So people might be especially thinking about their own personal or family health safety, especially if if you yourself are immunocompromised, if you have family or relatives that are immunocompromised. There just might be more general fear attached to that. And then we've seen a little bit of almost obsessiveness of cleanliness and making sure that you're not leaving the house and that you are taking these extra steps. For some people, as I said before, it's really boosted their anxiety levels as well. I know quite a few people who have barely left their house in 5 months because of that fear level. There's also the financial safety that we've talked about. There's been a lot of loss of jobs, a lot of economic stress, a lot of employment concerns. Just what does my employment look like? Again, did I lose my job? Am I at risk for losing my job? So there's that kind of looming threat or sense of vulnerability as well. And then the biggest thing with COVID-19 is the factor of the unknown. And as somebody mentioned it in the chat as well, that we don't know what the future looks like right now, right? And even as of a few weeks ago, we had an idea that's now being changed again, right? You look at California, who just opened up their businesses, their bars and their restaurants, and then within a week or so time, they've had to make the decision to close it back down again. And so this unknown is such a looming heavy threat for us, and makes COVID-19 all that more complicated. So again, I mentioned that trajectory we typically see with a disaster. COVID-19 isn't fitting the trajectory simply because we don't know when the disaster will be over yet. We are still in the hurricane just hit us phase. And so while pieces are getting recovered and when we're able to kind of adapt and work through certain challenges with COVID-19, we're still in the disaster piece of it. And we don't know when it'll look, how it'll look in the future, when that future will come. Betsy says, I also think some people feel threatened by the government and the loss of individual rights. Absolutely. And that's, again, what makes COVID-19 a little bit extra threatening for us, is because everybody is, or I guess I would say, no, maybe not everybody, the government is making in some cases, some drastic decisions. And there's so many complicated pieces that come to that. And people might feel very threatened by having that loss of right, you know. People, again, we mentioned it earlier, but people upset with having to wear masks, right? Maybe they don't understand why, they don't feel it as big of a threat as the next person, and they feel frustrated or angry that they're being told they have to do this. And so there's just a lot of complicated feelings regarding the unknown and regarding the safety precautions being put in place everywhere. What we do know is that individuals will feel safer if they know how to practice personal safety behaviors. So again, having things like PPE, hand sanitizer, general guidelines of what the symptoms are and how to treat it or how to get help for the symptoms. So knowing how to kind of maintain your personal safety behavior, how to feel or how to get social support from other people. So that's been one of the difficult things with COVID-19 too, is how to reach out and continue or maintain some of the social support we have. That's broken down for a lot of people. And some people it's strengthened, which is wonderful because they've been able to reach out more. But I think for the majority of people, their social support network has felt threatened or felt a little bit unstable. So gaining some of that social support, making some of those important connections helps instill that sense of safety as well. How to find and use helpful resources is really important. So making sure that people are getting their information from a reputable source, especially in, you know, the land of fake news that we've got everywhere, making sure that the information you're getting is from a source you can trust and rely on. And then what kind of resources are available for someone as well. Again, having this factor of the unknown, I think there were quite a few resources available within the first, you know, maybe month, 2 months of this. And then as this has continued, we're now into month 5, some of those resources are now tapped out. There's no money left, or there's no funding left for some of it. And so how do we continue to provide or use resources now that we're heading into month 5, 6 of this pandemic? How to feel themselves to be coping effectively is really important. And so we'll talk a lot about what kind of strength areas we can look at and how to promote coping in each of those areas. But that's a huge thing as well. That eases anxiety, it can ease depression, some of those other harder feelings, if I know how to cope through some of those more intense moments or some of the more intense stress. And then how to experience positive emotions. In a time when stress and safety is so heavy, it can also be harder to feel positive emotions, right? And again, coming with that, the concern for safety as well, if I choose not to leave my house because of safety reasons, then I might be missing out on experiences that might make me happy or boost my mood as well. So learning how to have some of those positive emotions within the environment that feels safest to you. If you want a bit more information specifically on safety and resilience, you can go to this website here, northeastern.edu. They have a specific safety module provided regarding COVID-19. And then talking about how to promote calming. So calming, I think we tend to kind of push to the side at times where, you know, I'll be fine, I don't need to use any of these skills, but calming can have a huge impact on the tension, on the physical and mental exhaustion that we're experiencing. It can ease the impact of stress and anxiety. So it does way more good than we sometimes give it credit for. So grit leaders and grit coaches can discuss ways that individuals can calm themselves. And again, you can use these skills for yourself, especially by sharing apps, resources, skills that you can use to promote calming. And then knowing that being calm yourself is an important component of resilience. And the more calm we are, the more calm somebody else is going to be too. We have these great little neurons in our brain called mirror neurons that mean that when what we see in front of us, we tend to mimic. So if you're talking to someone and you're calm and presenting yourself with confidence and knowledge about certain areas, and you know you've got some skills and able to work through that, the more somebody else sees that, the more they're going to feel better about the situation as well. We're going to get into self-efficacy in the next module in a little bit today, but having people present themselves and having a good model of behavior, it can be a huge proponent in your own resilience and self-efficacy as well. Breathing exercises, huge helpful resource and skill there. And there's also a ton of different ways to breathe. You wouldn't know it, but there's tons of different ways to breathe. The classic one, take a deep breath in, deep breath out, wonderful for a lot of people. cycle. You can break it down even slower than that. You've used different, yeah, love breathing exercises as well. We can also help calm by normalizing experiences. So with support, access to resources, passage of time, most people are going to return to a sense of normalcy once the event has passed. Again, the complicated piece about COVID is that the event hasn't passed yet, and so it's hard for us to get back to normal. And normal is going to be very different now. And so understanding what are the new challenges that you'll have when you return back to a normal life is an interesting question. So we want to help provide resilient support to those in need and remind others that they're going through a stressful time and that it's common and expected to feel this distress. And so there's a difference between kind of going into this, what I call a negativity spiral, where all we talk about is COVID and the stress we're experiencing and the negative aspects. That's easy to go into. I think as humans, we tend to drift towards the negative when talking to people, and then we get into this little spiral that's hard to get out of. What we can do instead is validate the experience, saying things like, I believe this is stressful for you. I hear the impact it's having on you. I too have been stressed out about this. This is what I'm doing about it. Or saying things like, why don't, do you want to try this breathing exercises I learned? And giving somebody support and resources for the stress. So we're not going into the spiral. We're validating that the stress exists. We're normalizing it by saying, I too have felt some of these symptoms. And then we're hopefully providing some coping and resilience in getting through those events. We want to promote connectedness. So I can't say it enough times that social support is time and time again shown to be a booster in emotional well-being and recovery following trauma and disaster. And when we promote connectedness, we're communicating feelings. Again, if you're hearing somebody who's having some anxiety because of safety, you can share that you too maybe have had anxiety about safety. And if you haven't, that's also okay. Sharing or asking questions, what is it about this that's making you especially anxious? Or can you help me understand what you might be stressed about? We can also share information. So that's a big piece of the resources we're going to give you, hopefully, as well as what we're doing right now in like the chat is just sharing what's going on, sharing how we're getting through things. How to problem solve together is a huge piece as well. Again, that's why Survive and Thrive exists, right? It's to help you overcome certain problems and do it in a network where you can promote this level of connectedness. How to attain resources after a disaster. Again, maybe those are things like helpful apps that we'll share with you, and there's thousands of apps out there that can be helpful. There's websites you can use. There's reliable sources you can go to get your information. But when we're in the middle of stress, especially for those who are more vulnerable to the negative impacts of stress, we can kind of get this cognitive overload where I'm taking in so much information that I don't even know where to start, right? And so having somebody sit down with you and say, let's just try this one resource first, and let's just see how far that gets us, can be incredibly helpful. Promoting hope. So again, that's a big premise of what we're doing here, but it's believing that the future is going to get better and that things are going to work out. And while that sometimes feels false, where I'm just saying the words, we absorb what we hear. Time and time again, we are going to absorb what we listen to. So the more we can talk about and try to instill hope in each other, the more our bodies are going to absorb that information. A sense of hopelessness can kind of set in for a lot of people, especially those who have been impacted even harder by the pandemic. There's that sense of, how am I ever going to get through this? But what we know is that humans are resilient. Like I said, everybody here in this conversation is resilient. I firmly believe that everybody in the world has a level of resilience, or else we just wouldn't be standing here anymore. And so how do we boost that together? And we do that by coming together as a community to rebuild, re-engage, and push forward. I think one of the beautiful, wonderful things that has come from COVID is the way our communities are coming together. I don't think we do it as much anymore, but there was, the 7 p.m. singing and chanting and banging pots and pans together for our healthcare workers. Those kinds of behaviors like send chills in my spine, because it's just showing how we can come together, how we can promote that hope and resilience in each other. I think in a world where we're probably the most stressed out we've ever been, I think we also have an amazing opportunity right now to work on resilience together and become more resilient as a country, as a world as well. And then lastly, promoting a sense of self and collective efficacy. So this is kind of an interesting concept. We'll go into it more in depth tomorrow, in the next module. The self-efficacy centers around an individual's belief in your own personal ability to handle stress and threats that a disaster, such as a pandemic, is causing. So it's that little voice inside of you that says, I can do this. I know how to get through this, or I know how to ask for help. And at the end of the day, I'm going to keep trying. I can do this. We build that sense of efficacy by effectively handling difficult situations little bit by bit. And so a great example is, how do we run a marathon? We don't just run the 26 miles the first day we train, right? We start with training for a mile, and then we build that up to 2, and then 3, and then we go forward. And maybe you never get to the marathon, and that's great. Maybe your body says, yeah, I'm good at this 5K, or I'm good at this 2 mile, whatever that looks like for you. But it's that voice inside that says, 1, I can do this, and then 2, I'm good. I've got this, right? And then we build self-efficacy through seeing other people, friends, families, again, your leaders in your community, effectively handle stressors. And so that's where you can come together, or you can come forward as a leader, or again, a small business owner, and say, I believe I can do this, and these are the ways I'm getting through this, and these are the ways that I'm showing up. So maybe, these are some examples you can try as well. When we receive support from a friend or a loved one who encourages us that we can do this, again, we absorb what we hear. So the more you tell people, you got this, I'm here to support you, we can do this together, the more that absorbs into the body. And then how do we effectively manage our own physical and emotional distress? And that's where those coping skills come back into play as well. How do we work through anxiety or stress or depression or anger, any of the complicated feelings that might arise because of the pandemic? And that hits, again, all 5 of those core principles of disaster support. We want to try to instill a sense of safety. We want to promote physical and mental calming, connect with other people, instill some hope for the future. Even when the future is unknown, we can still hope for the best, or we can hope for a sense of normalcy again. And then building a sense of self and collective efficacy, building that confidence in our ability to cope through a disaster. So that takes us to the end of this first module. Again, we'll go into more skills, resources, strengths in the next few. I want to take the last remaining time to answer any questions you might have. I know I tend to talk very quickly, so if I didn't hit something long enough, please let me know. I'm happy to talk more about this. Grit is what I love. We really hit the ground running in trying to promote or trying to create, to begin with, this program, and to really spread it out to everybody. Right now we have people in 33 different states who have signed up for this training. We have people in 3 countries. We got Australia and the United Kingdom that have taken some of these trainings as well. So our whole belief is just the more we can share and the more we can support one another, the more we can build that resilience in each other as well. And I'm hoping that we can do this in that leadership role as well. So take a few minutes. Let me know if there's any questions. Let me share my email as well, because I can answer any questions if you're kind of ruminating on something, maybe want to talk something through. I'm happy. That's what I'm here for. I'm happy to go through some of those with you. And then I'll share the Grit website as well. We'll go through kind of what's available on Grit.